Hi, I'm Andrea, Kalin, creative director and writer on The People's Recorder. Stutz Terkel was many things: a Pulitzer Prize-winning author, oral historian, radio legend, fiery populist, labor advocate, and above all, a master listener. For 45 years, his Chicago radio show invited everyday people to share their stories, the kind history so often forgets. Curious, big-hearted, a little mischievous, Stutz was one of the great conversationalists of our time, and we were lucky. Ours was one of the last long, in-depth interviews he gave before his death at 96 years old. I remember it was the middle of a brutal Chicago winter. Only Stutz could lure us there in February. His modest home, tucked in a quiet corner of the city, was as colorful and layered as he was. Books stacked to the ceiling, papers covering every surface, and a closet filled with, guess what, red checkered shirts. When we rang the bell to his house, there was no answer. Then we knocked on the window. He dozed off in his favorite chair. Classic Stutz. The interview itself was a gift. Generous, unfiltered, full of stories and surprises. He made us laugh, he challenged us, and he entertained. We surprised him with some old scripts he hadn't seen in decades, and his face just lit up. Our conversation flowed like jazz. It wasn't just an interview. It was a ride through memory and meaning. After we wrapped, we hung out in Stutz's kitchen. He offered us all a round of his famously strong martinis. I told him I didn't drink. Didn't matter. He made me one anyway. I pretended to sip and then quietly poured mine into other people's glasses, of course when he wasn't looking. Before we left, he signed my copy of Hard Times with a simple message: "Keep up the good work, Andrea." That's what we're still trying to do: carry forward Stutz's legacy of people-first storytelling. Stutz believed in preserving the truth of a person, not sanding off their edges, but letting their essence rise. He warned us of the dangers of national amnesia and reminded us that history isn't just what happens in war rooms or White Houses. It's made by people simply trying to live, work, and matter. He had a way of speaking, directly to the American moment, whatever that moment happened to be. And no matter how dark it seemed, he reminded us, we've been here before. We've made it through, and we will again. So here at the People's Recorder, we keep listening, we keep recording, we keep telling stories that might otherwise disappear. Because as Stutz reminded us, that even when hope thins, stories endure. And through them, so do we. So settle in, enjoy, and let's dive in to a full-on interview with Stutz Terkel. I'm going to start at the time around law school. When you left law school, what were your plans? What did you think you were going to be doing?
When I left law school, the University of Chicago, class of 1934, one thing I knew: I did not want to practice law, under no circumstances. I went there dreaming of Clarence Darrow, and I woke up to contracts and partnership and corporations, and I went crazy. It was the Depression. And to a Depression boy or girl, a civil service job was ideal, regular, 9 to 5. That was my dream. And I did have a civil service job for a short time in Washington. And then came back to Chicago, and I did a variety of things, anything to escape the practice of law. And I became an actor. I acted with this theater group, did plays of what you call social significance back then. That's how I became a Chicago gangster in radio soap operas. And so I did those jobs for a while. They all ended when I got killed or sent to Sing Sing. I had many such jobs, but terrible tenure. And so the Depression was on, And private enterprise, as we call free market today, fell on its fanny with the Wall Street crash of 1929. And millions unemployed, and along comes the New Deal of Franklin D. Roosevelt. And the government steps in and provides jobs where the private industry could not. And the WPA came into being, the Work Projects Administration. And here were men working, building roads and parks and schools. But there also was an arts project, a whole series of arts projects. That is, there was the Writers' Project for writers who weren't employed, work for them. There was the Theater Project for actors and directors and playwrights. There was the Music Project for unemployed musicians. There was the Dance Project. And I became part of the Writers' Project for a while.
Tell me, how did you become part of the Writers' Project? What led you from looking at the civil service jobs, trying to find something to do, and then getting on the Writers'
Well, I knew there was other work around. And then I heard about the Writers' Project, and I was writing things for this theater group. And I wrote something about Tecumseh, the Indian chief, a long essay about him, longhand. I hadn't used a typewriter, and I submitted it. And so they accepted my writings. Then I had to learn how to use a typewriter.
Did they tell you that you needed one, or how did that come about?
Well, I think I needed one anyway. They didn't say it, but it's obvious I did because it took a long time to write it out, and my handwriting wasn't that great. And so I had to learn to type. So I hunt peck. And now I've discovered the wonders of the electric typewriter. So when you ask me about a computer, I have no idea what you're talking about. When you mention the word internet, I don't know what it means. I hear a lot of talk about it. I hear talk about a thing called website. So my one concession in the 21st century is voicemail. But that's a problem in itself. Technology and I don't quite get along.
You said it was in 1934. What were some of your most vivid impressions of the Depression that year?
By the way, I joined the Writers' Project about 1939. There were other projects of the government with which I had jobs for a month, a year or so. And I had a job going from agency to agency to keep track of certain cities where unemployment was huge, cities known for certain industries. Pittsburgh, steelworkers unemployed. Omaha, Chicago, packing house workers. San Francisco, longshoremen out of work. My city was Omaha. I remember that very well. And it was a question of stockyards and unemployed people. And the 6 women on my table got paid, I think, $65 a month or 70. I got paid $85. In 1936, I think, or 37, a horse named Omaha won the Kentucky Derby. So I decided to bet a couple of bucks on Omaha. And the girls of my table, one jumped up and gave me a half a buck apiece. And then it was Saturday. The Derby is on a Saturday. And I feel guilty because how would I know the horse is going to win or not? And they give me a half a buck apiece. I talked them into it, the 6 girls. That's $3, you see. And so I go to see a movie with my friend. Well, maybe I'll bet later on. My conscience is bothering. I come out of the movie. It was Bolero, a movie called Bolero with Carol Lombard and George Raft. I come out, the headline is, Omaha wins Derby at 8-1. And that means I won $16. But what about those $3 of the girls? I didn't bet it, right? And imagine what they feel. They're home listening to the radio, they're jumping up and down. The horse won 8-1. So I had to raise $24, and I paid the girls their 8-1 odds. And they were jumping up and down, embracing me. And winning the Derby cost me money. I lost $8 on the deal. So anyway, that was what I was doing then. Then came the Writers' Project.
What was the office like?
Oh, well, it was a huge office. By the way, people didn't have to appear there every day. They could stay at home as long as they presented the work they were doing. Now, I had nothing to do with the guide. I was part of a division called the Radio Division. We wrote scripts that were presented on the radio. This particular project had a huge one called The Lives of Artists, broadcast on the radio by professional actors. I did one on Van Gogh, another one on Daumier, another one on Winslow Homer, and on Albert Pinkham Ryder, American writers early in the century. Another would do Rembrandt. Another would do early French Impressionists.
And did you go home and write these?
What happened is we'd talk with the curator, give me all the stuff you'd read up on it too, and then you'd go home and write it. Then when you finished the script, you came in and you read it before your colleagues. There must have been 8 of us or so, and we'd read it to our colleagues for their approval and our director's approval.
And what was the tenor of those meetings?
Oh, it was wonderful. We all liked each other very much and were rooting for each other, but we also criticized the work. Now, there's a great story goes with this. The scripts we did were performed over WGN. WGN Chicago was owned by the Chicago Tribune, which was owned by Colonel Robert McCormick. Colonel McCormick loathed Franklin Roosevelt. He loathed the New Deal, but most of all, he loathed the WPA, especially Harry Hopkins, the director. And the Tribune was known for its front-page cartoons and cartoons in color. First time paper had cartoons in color. And the cartoons were almost always anti-WPA. They would involve people leaning on their shovels, lazy. The word was boondoggling. A new word came into being called boondoggling. They were loafing on the job at taxpayers' expense. And they also had flaming, crazy college professors in the caps and gowns and crazy eyeglasses carrying a banner with a hammer and sickle. So Colonel McCormick loathed the WPA. The radio division writers had their scripts were performed by professional actors on WGN, directed by their program director. And at the very end of the program, there was an announcement written by so-and-so, courtesy of the Work Projects Administration, Harry Hopkins, director. That was an announcement then. One day, we got a call, you've all got to come at once, something has happened. So we thought we're all going to be fired, that the project is over. And he says, I'm going to read you a letter. And he reads a letter addressed to the WPA Writers Project from Colonel McCormick on his stationery. And it's something to the head of our project. He heard some of those programs about art and how proud he was to have his station carry this work that enlightened and enriched the lives of people when it comes to culture. And we said, oh my God. And then it occurred to me what happened. Colonel McCormick might have heard a couple of the programs and probably fell asleep before the credits came on. And he never heard the phrase, WPA Writers Project, Harry Hopkins. And so Colonel McCormick loved, so he wrote, those programs.
In fact, Studs, I have a couple scripts that I wanted you to see and that we could even read a few lines.
Well, here it is. This is Daumier.
Yes.
My God, you have the script about Daumier.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation, but there is more where that came from. To hear the full interview, please consider joining our Patreon. Your support will help keep the stories coming and out in the world where they belong. Learn more in the show notes or on our website, peoplesrecorder.info. Thank you for your support. This is Chris Haley. Thanks for listening.